Welcome back to my channel. Jim Sprinkles here with another video. Today we're going to be talking about why more people should try Pathfinder. I would like to just do one last call out to Neil Aday. Please get in contact with me via my email address, which is sprinklesgm93@gmail.com. That way I can organise what book you want. Otherwise, if I don't hear from you this time next week, I will be giving it away to the runner-up, which is Sam the Elfman. We are covering Pathfinder 2nd edition, because that's what I have started reading. I haven't finished reading, I've just read through the mechanics, character creation, and just the basics and how to play, and I just wanted to give my initial thoughts. So next week we have an interview with a GM from the Drunken Geek podcast. Shout out to them, great podcast. The GM's going to be on there. We're going to ask him some questions about how to play and what he found from moving from D&D 5e to Pathfinder 2nd edition. So if you've seen my first video, why I left D&D, one of the things was about the experience. It's really hard to remember how much XP you need to get to the next level. Well, this was what I found for me. But with Pathfinder, it's just 1000 XP and you level up. No matter what level you are, so easy, so simple, and I love that. Rather than the 300 XP to level 2, 900 to level 3, 2700 to level 4, and I think 6500 to level 5. And I just found that really hard to remember those numbers, and if I got them right, that's really good. That's the first 5 levels, but the rest I've got no idea, and I have to look that up each time, and I don't like to have to do that. I like to be in the moment, just know when leveling up, and I think that's a really good thing about the system, is just that simplicity there. However, Pathfinder is not what I would call a simple system. It is a good system from what I've read so far, but I wouldn't call it simple. It is a lot more complicated, and with that complication brings more rules, more mechanics, more crunchiness, and it makes it really feel alive. And I really like that about the system. I think it's really cool, even though one of my favorite things about the Scythe is the simplicity of it. And I see the positives of both of those. So I think that's where Pathfinder excels really well there. So D&D's right in the middle, which is not crunchy enough if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of that combat, and it's not simple enough where you can just run it on the fly like Cypher. And I think that is the benefit here. That's the key here, sorry. In Pathfinder, a natural 1 isn't necessarily a failure, and a natural 20 isn't necessarily a success. And you still have crits, but it's not a natural 20 or a 1 either. So what a critical is 10 above the DC. So if you had to roll a 15 to sneak past a guard, then that would be 25. If your total adds up to 25, that's a crit. Or if you roll really badly and your total adds up to 5, that's a critical failure. Now I do like that varying success. So you've got success, failure, excellent success, and excellent failure, I suppose, and I really like that about the system. So one of the benefits of this crit fail and crit succeed with everything is that does mean that if you're going to get hit by something like a fireball, you're going to need to make a reflex save, which is what they call it, like a dexterity save. It's called a reflex save in Pathfinder. If you critical success, you might not take any damage depending on the spell, or if you critical failure, you'll take double damage. And I just love that life and death sort of moment hanging in the balance. That's a really fun way to add to the combat in the system. So if you are loving combat, I highly recommend Pathfinder. Everything that I've read so far of it is just that it's very tactical and awesome for combat. The action economy in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is you get an action, a bonus action, and you get to move. And that's really good and all, but if you take a bonus action and you have another thing you want to do as a bonus action, you can't do that. You can't trade bonus action for an action, or if you don't move, you don't get anything else from that. And I think it's very strange, and it seems odd. I mean, I get the gist of it, but it just seems odd. And in Pathfinder, they fix that where you just have 3 actions. So you can move as one, or you can attack as one, or you can hide as one, or you can attack twice. And you just have 3 actions, and obviously some things cost more actions, which is really fun as well. So some spells might cost 2 or 3 actions to do, and I think that action economy is really fun to weigh up. Alright, am I going to do some move and then use a 2 action ability, or am I going to move twice and attack once? And that's really awesome in my opinion. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition you have advantage and disadvantage. You don't have this in Pathfinder. You have bonuses and penalties. So I haven't really seen where bonuses apply, but I assume it would be much the same as where you get advantage. So instead of having disadvantage at range, for example, you have a penalty. So if you have a bow that shoots 60 feet here, if you're shooting inside 60 feet, yep, normal roll, no penalty there. But if you're shooting between 60 and 120 in the next increment of 60, or next increment of range, it would be a penalty of -2. And if you go one further, so that's 90, you would, in that, from that 90 on to the, sorry, from the 60 to 90, that obviously would be -4, and so on, so on, so on. And I think that's really cool, because that -4 or the -2 is not going to necessarily impact you hugely. And if you're meant to be really good with a bow and you're shooting out of your range, sure, it should be more chance to miss, but disadvantage seems a little bit unfair at times, I feel, especially when you roll like a 15 and a 2, or a 10 and a 2 even. Like, sometimes it's just like, oh, so frustrating, because, you know, I don't feel that you should have that much of a penalty, and I think that's where disadvantage and advantage just really fall short, even though it's really simple and really easy to explain to new people. And another thing that did confuse me is initiative, which is based on perception in Pathfinder instead of just your dexterity modifier. The reason why this confused me is not the perception part, is that you can do initiative with other skills. So, for example, if you haven't been noticed yet and you're doing a stealth check, you know, you're sneaking around, you're stealthing, the DM asks you to roll initiative. You can roll initiative as stealth, so you just do a stealth roll, and that's your initiative. So if you roll a 20 on your initiative with your bonuses and everything, that there would mean that you'd be 30 against whatever everyone else rolls. So if you're really good at stealth, and you're hiding all the time, that's going to be compared to other people's perception rolls, and I think that's a lot of fun there. You can also do this like deception and other rolls as well. I'm not sure how that works, but I'm really interested to find out, because I like the idea, and I'm not sure if this is how it works, and I can't wait to find out, is that if it is something like charisma based, like you could like go, hang on, let me persuade you something to stop this combat, and you're being really persuasive, and that's giving you that quick, because you're quick tongued. I really like that, and I think that's really fun that, you know, you can use what your character's best at to act. So if you're not really combat and you're a bit slow, that shouldn't mean that you should always, I mean, you could get a good roll, but it shouldn't mean that you're penalized on your initiative, because you might be quick-tongued or quick-witted, and I think that should give you that chance, and I think that's really awesome about the system, actually. Dying in D&D is really simple and easy, but in Pathfinder, I had to read this section like a few times. It took me a while to get it, and I was very confused by it, but once I understood it, I loved it. I really like this idea. So in D&D, you do have that thing where you've got the 3 death saves and 3 death succeeds. So, you know, you go down, get a 0 hit points, you go down, and you got to roll a d20. If it's above 10 plus your con, you add your con. If it's higher than 10, then you get a success, and if it's lower, you get a failure. A crit is up with 1 hit point, and a failure is 2 death fails. And if you get a 3 death fails, you die, 3 successes, you're stable. Now, obviously, that's really cool and really easy to get your head around, except what happens if you keep dying, getting up, dying, getting up? There's no penalty there, and it's just, you know, you can go unconscious, get up, go unconscious. That should slow you down, in my opinion. And Pathfinder really gets around that issue and brings in this really cool system of how they're dying. And how it does that is you have dying conditions. So the way that works is you get dying condition 1 when you get to 0 HP. So if you're going to crit fail, that means you go down 2, so that makes you dying 3. And what that does mean is how to pass and succeed that is 10 plus your dying level. So automatically when you go to 0, you're going to have to roll 11 or higher. No con, no plus, it's just a flat roll. And obviously if you fail those up, it's going to get harder and harder. And once you get to 4, you die. But once you get to 0, your death level goes to 0, you're stabilized but not necessarily awake, and it can take 10 to a few hours to wake back up. So that's really cool as well. But obviously how it fixes that issue of going up and down is when you do come back up and someone feeds you a healing potion or uses magic to heal you, then what that does mean when you do get up, you have a wound 1, which doesn't really affect your character except for when you go back down to dying. So with that wound 1, that counts as a dying 1, so that does mean that if you automatically go back down afterwards, you're going to start at 2 dying 1s, and if they crit you, then it's going to be 3. So that means then you've got to, you know, got to do those rolls again, and then it's going to be harder because you've got to get a 12 or a 13 if you get critted, until you get up to dying 0. And once you get to that, you're unconscious again, and maybe someone heals you, you get back up again. And if you've got 2 wounds now, what that does mean is someone crits you and you get a 0, you automatically die. And that is so scary, but I love it. So this whole time you've got like 1 foot in the grave, 1 trying to keep in the living. And you can't just keep going up and down, because eventually it's just going to kill you. And I really like that. And it's really fun there that way. And you do obviously remove those wounds from resting and medicine checks, I believe, as well. And I think that's really fun to add that realism into. You also do have proficiency in Pathfinder, which works a little bit differently. So you have proficiency based on your training level, and you get it on your level. So what that means is if you're untrained in something, you just add your level to the roll plus the relative ability modifier. But if you're trained in that, then you get to add +2, and you have different various of training. So there's trained, there's trained, expert, mastery, legendary. So with trained, you get +2, expert is +4, and master is +6, and legendary is +8. And you get to add that to the roll. So it's really awesome to have that variation between types of training, and I think that's really awesome in the way that, you know, you can have a high level character who's going to stealth fairly well anyway just because they're high level, especially if they got lots of... So an example of this is the Barbarian starts with an expert in perception. They're an expert in perception and will saves, which is like your intelligence saves, but they're only trained in athletics and reflex saves, which, like mentioned before, is a dexterity saving throw. But I think that's really cool. So you get to start with varying parts of training. So you might be really good at one thing, medium good at something else, you might be untrained at something else. I just think that's awesome, and I really like the variation of training there. There's just more complexity in the system, and it makes it feel more realistic and more gritty and more tough, and the combat just feels more deadly. And if that's what you're about, then Pathfinder is for you, and I would highly recommend that. Because there's other roles, which I'm not going to go into right now, is the affliction and diseases. So basically, diseases aren't just overcome just as easy in Pathfinder. There's these rules of DCs depending on what was cast on you, and etc, etc. And I think that's really cool, because there's nothing worse than if you poison someone and they just do a roll and they're immediately better again. No matter what poison, that shouldn't just be gone necessarily. And I think that's really cool about the system. But where it really shines is that combat, there's that grittiness, and just to have those free options as well. But personally, that's not my favourite thing about the system. But my favourite thing about the system is character creation. There's just so many options between the ancestries, heritages, classes, and super large amount of backgrounds. There's just so much to pick from. And with D&D 5e, if you see one barbarian, they all kind of start feeling very samey, especially at later levels. You don't necessarily have this issue with Pathfinder because there's just so many feats that players can pick from level 1, and you get more at 3, and 1, 2, and every even level after that, I think. I'd have to double check that, but either way, you get to pick from feats all the time, and there's so many to pick from that, you know, you could have 2 goblin alchemists, and they might be wildly different because they've picked different feats and different abilities, and I think that's really fun, because there's nothing that upsets me more when I sit down and play a game of D&D 5e, and I rock up with a character and it's so similar to somebody else mechanically. It may be different personality wise, but you know, we're both paladins and we're all about healing, and I just think that's boring, and it's really fun if we could just have that mechanical difference. I know there are archetypes in 5e, but they just don't really get deep enough and crunchy enough. And feats are so much fun, and you really miss out in D&D 5e with the feats. And what I mean by that is, yes, there are feats, but you have to give up an ASI, an ability score increase. It's really sad for those characters who really want to min-max that character and get their stats really perfectly, which personally I don't care about stats, so I just go for the feats almost every time. But I don't ever want to have to make the decision. Why do I have to pick between that and that? Can't I just have both? And Pathfinder just has that approach, and I really like that about the system. But at the end of the day, that's Pathfinder. It's just got more rules, more complexity, but that's not a bad thing. It just adds more to the game, and I think that's really awesome about it. In fact, obviously, D&D is right in the middle there, so I play Cypher, which is really simple. Then you've got D&D, which tries to be in the middle, and I think that's why it falls short, is it tries to be everything. Where Pathfinder is really going to stand out because it's that crunchy combat, those crunchy rules, and that more in-depth there, and it just tells you how it is, which I really like. Where D&D kind of has very vague descriptions, where Pathfinder, like, this is how this works, there's no question about it, there's no interpretation. I mean, there's a little bit, but it's fantastic, even though the book could really use some better layout options. It's just awfully laid out, really hard to find what you need to find. It's just really good how you just have that freedom and just tell you exactly how the rule works. If you did enjoy the video, please like, subscribe, and share to your friends. If you don't have any friends, just scream out into your living room. Your neighbors will hate you, but I'll love you. Keep rolling those dice, but don't let them define you.